Welcome to a special edition of Frankly Speaking Sports Interviews. Tonight we have a very, very special guest for you, and I hope you're all doing very well. Before we introduce our special guests, I want to remind you all that if you want to hear any of these past interviews or current interviews or any of our future interviews, you can go to our YouTube channel. All you have to do is go ahead, subscribe, and it's Frankly Speaking Sports, and you'll be able to see all of these interviews on our YouTube channel. Also, you can go ahead and follow us on our Twitter account at Larry Frankus. I want to welcome you all to a very exciting night. At this time on the Frankly Speaking Sports Hotline, I would love to introduce to you a gentleman that covers Korean baseball in English for Yonhap News. Please welcome Jeeho Yoo. Jeeho, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Oh, I really appreciate you coming on. Jeeho, let me start off with this, and let's go back a couple of months ago because, you know, we understand what's going on with the COVID-19 epidemic, at least here in America where we are. Why don't you explain to our listeners about, you know, the epidemic and how the country over there in South Korea got a handle on it and how it affected you and your family?
Yeah, so, first of all, I'm not a medical expert by any means, but I think as a country, we've been fortunate to have a lot of testing available widely, so it was fairly easy, I think, for people with symptoms to get tested and get their results back pretty soon. And I think it was that kind of aggressive testing, some contact tracing to figure out how the virus was spreading that helped us, to get to this point where, it has become safe enough to play baseball. And also we've got our soccer league going on for the past 3 weeks or so. And golf also returned to Korea. Just picking up a sport, and also the children have come back to school. It's been a phased, gradual process since last week. So, things are, I guess, gradually returning to normal, if you will, in Korea. I think thanks to the wide availability of testing, and also, people, I guess, sticking to their quarantine measures, wearing masks in public, maintaining their distance. We didn't have, I don't think we had any complete lockdown of any city in particular, but, people kind of stayed home, I guess. Didn't really go out that much for a good period of time early in the spring. And, we've had some, I guess, ups and downs with the number of cases recently also, but I think for the most part, we've, I would think that we've gone past really the worst point with this pandemic. So, we've gone from having over 100 cases maybe each day to, staying in the double figures, maybe as low as single digits at some point. So I don't know if you're going to have, absolute zero cases for whatever days. I don't know if that's even possible, but I think we've got this under control for the most part. And it's gotten to a point where, as I mentioned, we're playing some sport and the kids have gone back to school.
Well, that's great news. Great news there. Let me ask you this. Leading back up to baseball, before baseball came back, I would assume that the beginning of the season in Korea was delayed. Am I correct?
Yep, was supposed to begin on March 28th. There was a no-go because March, the situation was really bad nationwide. So the league ended up pushing it back to 5th of May. So that you're looking at just about a month, a little over a month of delay. And same for soccer and same for other sports too.
Okay, now let me ask you, was there any type, because, right now Major League Baseball here in the States is contemplating on when to come back here. And was there any type of compromise that the players and the owners had to do in Korea before they came back and played?
if you're talking about financial compromise, no, there has been any discussion of the sort. The players are getting paid in full. There's no talk of any prorated salaries or taking pay cuts. None of that in the KBO. I mean, for one, the players don't have a union, so they don't. It's not like they really have much power to begin with. But in terms of their salaries, they're still getting paid the same amount of money. They're going to be. The goal is to play the full season, 144 games here in the KBO, despite the late start. So the schedule is going to be a little compromised, a little more compressed than usual. So it might take a physical toll on those players later in the summer, maybe when they start playing more double headers down the road. Play games on Monday, which is usually an off day in the KBO. But other than that, financial compromise, there hasn't been any talk of that before the season began.
Now, what rules, if any, Jeeho, had to be implemented before they would allow the players to come back and play?
So some of the measures, wearing masks for coaches on the field, first base and third base coaches, plus umpires, they all have to wear masks the whole time. The players, they have to get the temperature checked a couple of times a day before the start of the game, and they also have to keep the masks on when they're not on the field or when they're not in the dugout. So when they're in the clubhouse or what have you, they still have to keep their masks on. Bare hand high fives and other handshakes, other celebrations, they're kind of discouraged. I think players still do it because they're such creatures of habit, but they're discouraged. Spitting and chewing tobacco were banned. I think you still see some spitting from time to time, but chewing tobacco has been banned for, I guess, sanitary reasons. What else is there? Obviously, playing with no fans yet in the stand. Boys, they have to keep the masks on, and also the sanitary gloves. Media and the front office people at the games have to keep the masks on. So, a lot of those, I guess, minor inconveniences, given the situation overall in the real world out there.
Right. Yeah, obviously. So let me ask you, do the players, like, let's say after the game, do they have any restrictions that the teams or the owners over there of the teams are putting on them as far as what they can do and what they're not allowed to do? And I'm talking off the field now.
Yeah, so off the field, I think some teams might have some restrictions in terms of what they can do. I think I would imagine they're discouraged from going out too much, after games. I think they're being asked to kind of lay low, maintain distance, it's not do anything foolish. When they're out in town, when they're on the road. So basically, that might be it. I haven't heard any restrictions per se in terms of what they can do, what they can do. But I think the players have been told just to be smart about what to do and just not take any risk in terms of not only infecting themselves but infecting other people, because we haven't had any positive case, knock on wood. But if something happens at some point in the season, the league will probably have to stop, and we're probably most likely will have to cut the number of games to play this year, and that doesn't really help anybody. So I think the players are being asked to just to not do anything foolish.
Right. Now, are they allowed to go out in groups, Yeeho, or do they, are they, I mean, obviously they might be discouraged, but are they permitted to go out in groups?
Maybe in small groups. Again, the teams may have all different measures, different rules regarding the off-field stuff. But I think the government is telling people that they should stay home. So I don't see how baseball teams would tell their players that it's okay to go out. So I think the message is pretty clear from the government. You still got to maintain your distance and avoid, going out in groups and all that. So I think obviously the same rule applies to baseball teams.
Right. We are talking to Jeeho Yoo. He covers Korean baseball in English for Yonhap News in Seoul, South Korea. So you mentioned it a little bit. Why don't we elaborate on it a little bit? If a player does end up testing positive in the Korean Baseball League, what happens?
So that player and his team will be shut down, and his team's most recent opponent will also have to go into quarantine. And then my guess is the last time I heard about this from the league is that they're actually going to go on playing the rest of the league, and then the league will sit down with other team officials to discuss their next steps. What I'm saying is they're not going to just shut down the league right away. They will most likely try to keep on playing and then discuss whether they should actually shut it down or how many games they should cut from the schedule and whatnot. So, they're not going to hit just the panic button just based on one positive test.
Okay.
They're gonna be careful with that, just in terms of shutting down that particular team and their opponent, and then try to figure out things from there.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Now, I've been seeing a couple of games. There's no there's no fans in the stand, but there's fake fans in the stand. What is that all about?
So some teams have put some dolls in the seats. One particular team, NC Dinos, I think they've been receiving some pictures of fans from the U.S. and then in Korea, and they've made like cardboard figures out of those photos and installed them in the seats behind the home plate. So if the NC Dinos are playing on an ESPN game, you're going to see those cutouts of fans from the U.S. and also some parts of Korea. So, the players have been playing in front of empty seats for quite some time now. In addition to the regular season, they were playing all the spring training games without fans. So they're kind of used to it, I think, by now. But I think the teams are trying to help create some anything close to game-like atmosphere,
Right.
some bases in the seat. So, those actions have been received pretty well. The fans appreciate those gestures, and the players, I think they're a little more comfortable seeing some faces up there in the seat.
Yeah, and that makes sense. If that does definitely make sense. Just the appearance of seeing faces out there. You said the season started on what date? Did they officially start back up?
5th of May, May 5th.
May 5th. So it's probably been not even a month yet. Right. Has there been any timetable that you heard of when the authorities may allow regular fans back in the stands?
Yeah, so they've been discussing this for some time. They're looking at sometime in June, maybe. They're going to keep an eye on how the schools handle the return of the children. If there's any sudden spike in cases following the return of students to school, that's going to affect the KBO's kind of having fans back in the stands. But if we sort of keep a number of cases relatively low in the next whatever number of days, then I think the KBO will be emboldened to open the gates a little bit. But it's going to be a phased process. We're not going to go from 0 fans to 20,000.
Right.
I think the teams are going to be selling maybe 20% of the seats at first, and then 30% and 40%, and hopefully by the time we have the postseason in November, we will have the usual packed houses to play in front of.
Now, I don't know if you'll know this answer, so I apologize if you don't, but how much of an effect financially without the fans is it impacting Korean League?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact figures with the teams. They're pretty famously secretive with the financial numbers.
Okay.
But yeah, you can't be helping for obvious reasons. Gate receipts are a huge part of their bottom line. obviously hurts them. But the teams, the league did sign a pretty substantial TV rights deal for the season, and the merchandise, the interest in merchandise has probably shot up internationally for after having games on ESPN. So I think they try to make up for whatever losses they're incurring with some merchandise sales and the TV rights deal money. So it's not gonna compensate 100%, but yeah, it can't be helping not having any fans in the seats.
Right. We're talking to Jeeho Yoo. He covers Korean baseball in English for Yonhap News out of Seoul, South Korea. You mentioned ESPN, and obviously with no Major League Baseball going on right now in the USA, ESPN has really been a part of Korean baseball from a coverage standpoint. Actually, until very, very recently, it's the only thing we've really gotten to watch live here in America. You mentioned some of the impact, but what has it meant, for the league to have ESPN involved?
Yeah, there's a lot of eyeballs for sure, and there's never been this much interest in the KBO in its league history until this year. And in addition to ESPN, KBO games are available live in Japan, and also recently, I think it was just the previous week, that the KBO announced ESPN will be putting the games on in 130 other countries through their international affiliates. So you're getting games in Canada, Africa, Europe, other parts of Asia, and Middle East. So there's great exposure for this league. It's a showcase for some Korean players hoping to, make a jump to the majors maybe down the road. And also, interestingly enough, some of the former major league players that are playing in the KBO, they might be getting more ESPN exposure now than before in their careers. When they were playing in the majors back a couple of years back, maybe their teams were not featured on ESPN as much, or maybe they weren't regular, starting. They weren't in the starting lineup as much, so maybe they weren't getting any ESPN games covered. But now they're playing Korea. Their friends and family back in the U.S. can watch them play on ESPN, or at least the highlights. So it's just an interesting dynamic for them. I think early on there was a lot of excitement among the players that they're getting some ESPN coverage, but over the past couple of weeks, it's kind of gone back to business as usual. The players trying not to get too conscious about having those ESPN U.S. audience eyeballs.
Right. Now, let me ask you, in South Korea, do they have access to watch a lot of Major League Baseball from the USA?
Oh, yeah. MLB.com. That's, I guess, the legal way of watching it. A lot of MLB is a big deal in Korea. Some Korean players are there, and then not just because of that, but baseball in general is a big sport. So people do pay out, to shell out $100+ a year to watch games live or on demand on MLB.com. And obviously, there are other ways of watching live sports or on-demand sports on the internet. So there's a whole bunch of ways you can watch MLB games. And also, MLB games are available on Korean cable, and you can stream them for free in Korean commentary online. So fairly easy to watch MLB games in Korea.
Now, there's quite a few. I mean, there's a few players, at least say that, in Major League Baseball that are from South Korea. I mean, those players back home, like, for example, G-Man Choi. I'm a big G-Man Choi fan for the Tampa Bay Rays. How big are those guys? I mean, how popular are they back at home?
So the biggest Korean player in the majors over here is Ryu for the Toronto Blue Jays.
Mm-hmm.
Couple of things. Now, he played some KBO ball before he went to the majors. He played, I think, 7 years here, and then signed with the Dodgers, and then became a free agent, joined the Toronto Blue Jays for this year. So the players who played in the KBO before going to the majors, the fans have a stronger connection with those players. So you mentioned G-Man Choi. though he's been in the majors for quite some time, I guess he's been a journeyman for most of the part. But even though he's been in the U.S. for a number of years, he's not quite as big as Ryu, just because he didn't, have the opportunity to build a connection with the KBO fans. Same with Shin Soo-chu of the Texas Rangers. He's been in the majors for, I think, 14, 15 years.
Yes.
But he didn't play ball. He didn't play pro ball in Korea. He signed out of high school. So, as long as he's been in the majors, the KBO fans don't have the same connection with Chu as they do with someone like Ryu. So, just to explain that, Ryu is a rock star over here. He's one of the biggest professional athletes in any sports in Korea.
Okay.
If you do a poll, national poll, he'll be number one or number two in terms of the most popular, the nation's favorite professional athlete.
For those of you just joining us, we are talking live to Jeeho Yoo. He covers Korean baseball in English for Yonhap News. Should you have any questions while I'm interviewing Jeeho that you may like to ask, that might, relate to what we're going through in the U.S., or just any questions in general, just leave a comment in the comment section. And as long as I see it, I will do my best to ask him before we are done here. One thing I noticed from watching the games in Korea, and I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me, Jeeho, but it seems like the players are a lot calmer in the Korean League than they are in Major League Baseball. I'll give you a couple examples. When somebody robs a home run or makes a diving catch, the player that hits the ball doesn't get upset. It's almost like they're smiling, recognizing it's a great play, or you don't see a lot of arguing with the umpires. Is that just my imagination, or do you think that that's a true fact?
Well, with the umpires, if you go by the book, if you stick to the rule book, if you so much to stare at them, you get posted out. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, you're not even allowed to talk with them over anything. So. If you just strictly go by the book, you get posted out. So that's why you don't see a lot of argument there. The players have to just bite the bullet and keep their heads down and go back to the dugout. With the pitchers maybe giving a home run, you're gonna see some emotions too. Not necessarily anger per se, but you talk about athletes a lot. I think over in the U.S. with the KBO, it's just a way of expression. I think for players. It's been a part of the game here for quite some time, and they're not afraid to, show their emotions a little more. At least, I guess the hitters. Yeah, with the pitchers, the smiling aspect. Yeah, I just kind of, here we go again, kind of smile. I've done it again, that kind of thing, right? So, but as far as guys maybe punching the water coolers or like kicking the walls or something like that, you're probably not going to sit as much over here.
Right. Now, let me ask you this thing, and I'm sure anybody that you probably talked recently to in the USA has probably asked you this question, because it seems like a hot topic here. What is it about this umpire situation, the rule where I guess you can send an umpire if they're the worst umpire down to the minor leagues?
Yeah, so I wrote this story.
Okay.
So this is like the system, promotion, relegation, where the worst guy in the KBO can get sent down to the minors, and the top guys from the minors can get called up to the big in the KBO the following season. So they're going to evaluate their performances using some objective data at the end of the season, and basically rank them. And the last guy will get sent down, and the last five, the five umpires who finish in the bottom five in the back-to-back years, and they're gonna get sent down too. So you're looking up to 4 or 5 umpires who will be demoted, I guess, and that was to encourage, basically, telling them to get their act together, I guess, do a better job, and kind of a stick, if you will.
Yeah, that is something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, that is something we can definitely use over here. I could think of a couple of umpires off the top of my head that I would suggest they maybe need to go back down and definitely better themselves.
Yeah, so I was gonna say the Korean umpires they don't have a union either. So they have a committee. There's an umpires committee with the chairman of the committee, a veteran umpire who kind of represents their voice. But in terms of the collective action, it's a little more difficult compared to MLB umpires. So there's really no way for them to kind of oppose being sent down. But I think the message is, hey, if you don't want to get sent down, you got to do a better job than that. So I think it's fair, to be honest, for them to be evaluated. Obviously, they're humans; they're going to make mistakes. But I think the goal is not to punish them per se, but the goal is to minimize any blatant errors and try to keep it as consistent as possible.
Now, do they have instant replay in Korean baseball?
Yep, video reviews. Rules are pretty similar with MLB. 2 challenges per team. I think they're almost virtually the same. What can be reviewed, what cannot be reviewed, and 2 challenges plus 1 extra challenge for an extra inning. So yeah, it's very similar.
Now, a few more questions before I let you go, Jeeho. You know both games. You watch Major League Baseball. You watch obviously Korean baseball. Is there any major difference between the 2 games?
Yeah, so MLB now, the past whatever years, I think the issue is lack of action, right? There's home runs, walks, and strikeouts, and little in between. So you don't see a lot of balls being put in play. In the KBO, you're going to see a lot of balls being played. You're going to see more action. We're going to see some home runs, guys grinding out a bat, putting the ball in play. Even the hitters batting toward the bottom of the lineup, not necessarily great hitters. They can put the ball in play and force defenders to work. And a lot of things can happen when you force defenders to actually move and work. So I would say there's more action in a typical KBO game than an MLB game, just because the whole launch angle phenomenon hasn't really caught on yet. Not everybody's trying to launch home runs every time out. There's more value to going the other way, I guess, putting the ball in play, moving the runners over, that kind of thing.
So let me ask you this, and you'll understand this question, Jeeho. I think I know the answer, but for my listeners, for the Korean players, and I'm trying to compare them to the Major League Baseball players here for a moment. What's more important? Is it the dollar or is it the prestige?
Oh, from Korean players going to the major?
No, just in general. I mean, when they play the game in Korea, here there's a lot of players, unfortunately. They play for the love of the game, but a lot of them also play for the might. The dollar is more important. In Korea,
Right.
is it about because it seems like a lot of the players are paid, in that same vicinity. And I'm sure some players get paid more than others, but is it more prestige for the Korean players?
Well, it's hard to say. Yeah, I mean, the pay's not that great in the lower sort of tier of the guys. Like rookie minimum, the average salary hasn't really gone up that much in recent years. So maybe closer to prestige than the dollar figures, or I guess the money. But the high-end guys get paid quite a bit. The highest paid, the top 1%, if you will, and they get paid a ton of money. But there's a lot of discrepancy between those guys and the guys in the bottom of the pay scale. So, yeah, I would say it's a mix. I'm going to cap out and say it's a favorite mixture, a little bit of both, but
Yeah.
maybe a little closer to prestige than maybe the dollar figures.
So is it the goal of a Korean player to make it to really shine in the Korean League, I would assume, and then get that opportunity to go to the major leagues?
Yeah, really talented guys, the guys who are kind of destined to greatness, from the get go. Their ultimate goal is to go to the majors. And there have been quite a few guys in recent years who've made the jump, kind of have a cup of coffee and come back after maybe 1 year or two. But I think they will always have that on their resume, if you will. Hey man, I've played in the majors. May not have played in that many games, but I was actually there. So yeah, that's a big thing. Obviously, not everyone is talented enough to make that jump. But when the guys who do realize how good they are, they try to go to the majors when they can. So they become eligible after 7 years. They can get posted after 7 seasons and become a free agent after 8 years. So they put in their work here, pay their dues, and when they get to the point when they feel like they're good enough to go to the majors, they're going to keep trying it.
Now, the last question before I let you go, Jeeho, is if there was any advice you could take from your experience on watching the Korean Baseball League and give it to Major League Baseball to do, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it's hard to have something that works here and then take it over to the U.S., to Canada, and then try to make it work there. So, I've been asked that question a few times, to be honest. I do know for a fact that MLB is kind of watching KBO and how KBO was able to begin the season when it did during the pandemic and try to take cues from it. But I think it's really up to, it's one thing for the league to set all the rules, right? I think the MLB recently put out these 60-watt pages long of some guidelines for return to play action. But it's really up to the players and the team to, honor those rules. I mentioned little things like wearing masks or, maintaining the distance and not doing anything foolish and that kind of thing. So over here in the KBO, in terms of keeping things safe, 3 weeks into the season, we've had a pretty, I guess, so far safe season, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the same rules will be applied to the MLB, and the MLB guys will be able to have the same sort of the same safe structure. So,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I think it's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, it is. And I said it was the last question, but I have one more. I would assume,
Sure.
because of what you just said, listen to what you said, and I'm not a political guy at all, but I would think that it sounds to me like your government over there in Korea has had a lot better success at handling the COVID-19 so your players could get back to playing than they have done in America.
Yeah, I would say so. Again, I'm not a medical expert. I'm not
Right.
a medical scientist by any means, but yeah, I think the government has done a good job of with the aggressive testing and contact tracing and the quarantine people with symptoms and the people also as a people. I think we've done a good job to follow the rules, follow the guidelines with the social distancing. So that's how we've been able to get to this point.
Now, Jeeho, when you go to the game and when you cover the games, are you actually at the game?
I'm at the game, but yeah, here's a couple of things. So I can go to the game, but I have to keep the masks on. And in the press box, the writers have to maintain this distance. So we can't not sit right next to each other. There's got to be one empty seat in between. And we have we have no pregame access to players like we used to.
Uh-huh.
So, like, for example, the clubhouses are always off limits in the KBO, but instead we used to be able to get into dugouts pregame to talk to players, but that's gone. For the time being, we can only talk to managers in a press conference setting instead of in the more informal setting in the dugout. And post-game, we used to be able to get down to dugouts to talk to players, but now that's gone. So we can only talk to one player from the winning team, and that's it. So a lot less access for reporters. But I don't think anybody feels sorry for sports writers to have less access. So I'm not gonna complain too much.
Right.
But yeah, so that's one of the changes too. I guess that's a new reality for my perspective during this pandemic.
Right, and that's the reason I asked you if they will allow you at the game or you had to do it like sort of like ESPN was doing it virtually. Let me ask you, and I promise this will be the last question because every time you make such good points, I feed off that and have another question for you. One of the big things, and as sportscasters, sports broadcasters, people that cover the games for the papers, they always have this fear of what's it going to be like when I get to the stadium? Should they be scared? Should they not be scared with everything going on? You, as a person that covers the Korean Baseball League, is there any feeling of uncomfortability when you're at the game? Like, oh no, I might get sick, or oh no, what happens if someone has an epidemic? Or you feel comfortable in what everyone's doing to keep you safe?
I do for the most part, because of the fact that if you have any symptoms, if you have any fever or anything like that, you're not going to be allowed in. So people who are in the ball game, people who are inside the stadium, front office people, fellow media members, they're healthy. So and everyone's wearing masks, everyone's making their distance. So yeah, for me, like, the fear factor is not there really. Just because the fact that if you're showing any symptoms, you're not going to be allowed in there. So,
which is smart. Well, Jeeho, listen, it's been a real honor and pleasure to have you on Frankly Speaking Sports tonight. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you very much, and please stay safe.
Hey, you too. Thanks for having me today.
All right, thanks for coming on. That was Jeeho Yoo. He covers Korean baseball in English for Yonhap News. He was live from Seoul, Korea. Want to remind you all, if you enjoyed this interview, we have all of our past interviews and our future interviews are on our YouTube channel. All you have to do is go to Frankly Speaking Sports, go to YouTube. It'll say subscribe. Don't worry, it's free. Hit the subscribe button and you'll get all of our interviews that we have done since we've existed, and you can listen to them whenever you like. Want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We love having you. We love doing these interviews, and we'll see you next time on Frankly Speaking Sports Interviews.